$54,240. That's the number that showed up on my bank statement the morning everything fell apart. Not as money dumping in, as money that had already left 3 months earlier, and I hadn't even noticed. I want you to sit with that for a second. 3 months. That's how long a man named, we'll call him David Reyes because his real name doesn't deserve the views, had been laughing at me while I was sending him just checking in texts, while I was telling my sister our investment was doing great, while I was planning what I'd do with the returns. He was gone. The money was gone. And he thought he'd gotten away with it clean. He was wrong. This is the story of how I got every single dollar back, plus interest, plus a criminal record for him that will follow him for the rest of his life, plus something I didn't expect to get at all, the quiet, cold satisfaction of watching a federal judge read his sentence out loud while he stared at the floor. If you've ever been scammed, or you're worried you might be, stay until the end. I'm going to walk you through exactly what he did, exactly what I did to catch him, and exactly what you need to watch out for so it never happens to you. My name is Sarah. This is my story. Welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here, every story I tell is about greed, betrayal, and getting every single dollar back. No dramatization for the sake of drama, just what actually happened in order with the paper trail to prove it. Today's story has everything: a trusted family friend, a fake investment fund, a paper trail that took me 4 months to untangle, and an FBI agent who told me, and I quote, "In 11 years, I've never seen a victim build a case this clean." If stories like this keep you up at night in the best way, hit subscribe now because I post a new one every week, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Let's get into it. Let me take you back to the beginning, because to understand how someone loses 50 grand, you have to understand who I was before it happened. I was 34 years old, a project manager at a mid-sized logistics company in Ohio, making decent money but nothing extravagant. I'd spent 6 years aggressively paying off student loans, and finally, I had breathing room. About $62,000 sitting in a high-yield savings account, my someday money. Someday a house, someday a real vacation. Someday I'd stop feeling like I was one bad month away from panic. I want to be clear about something because this matters for what comes later. I wasn't reckless with money. I read personal finance books. I had a budget spreadsheet color-coded by category. I was, by every reasonable definition, careful, which is exactly why what happened next worked so well. The man who wasn't a stranger. David wasn't some anonymous voice on the phone or a random match from a dating app. That's the detail people always assume, and it's almost never how the big ones happen. David was my cousin's husband. I'd known him for 9 years. He'd been at my grandmother's funeral. He'd helped me move apartments back in 2019. We weren't best friends, but he was family adjacent in that way where you trust someone by default because the people around you trust them. He worked, or said he worked, in private wealth management. He had a LinkedIn with over 500 connections. He talked casually about clients, about SEC filings, about diversification in a way that sounded exactly like someone who actually knew what they were talking about. Looking back now, I can see it was pure performance. At the time, it just sounded like competence. The pitch started small, the way these things always do. At a 4th of July barbecue, he mentioned he was managing a private fund for a handful of people he trusted, a fund that had returned 14% the previous year by investing in pre-IPO tech companies and structured notes most retail investors couldn't access. He wasn't selling. That was the genius of it. He barely engaged when I asked follow-up questions. He just said something like, "Honestly, I probably shouldn't even be talking about it. We're not really taking new people right now." If you've ever read anything about persuasion psychology, you already know what that line does. Scarcity plus reluctance is one of the oldest tricks in the book. It works because it flips the dynamic. Suddenly, I wasn't being sold to, I was asking to be let in. Red flag number 1. Here's the first red flag, and I want to name it clearly because I know some of you are nodding already. Legitimate investment opportunities don't require you to beg to be included. Real fund managers have compliance departments. Real funds have offering documents, subscription agreements, and audited financials. I probably shouldn't even be talking about it is not due diligence. It's theater. But I missed it because he was family. Over the next 6 weeks, David sent me things that looked exactly like what a legitimate fund would send. A PDF pitch deck with a fund name, Meridian Growth Partners, a logo, and a mission statement about democratizing access to institutional-grade investment strategies. He sent screenshots of what he said were account statements showing consistent double-digit annual returns going back 4 years. He even gave me a fake form ADV number that, had I looked it up on the SEC's actual website, would have returned absolutely nothing. That's red flag number 2. I never independently verified anything. I trusted the documents because I trusted the person who sent them. I didn't check the SEC's database. I didn't ask for the fund's actual custodian, the third-party institution like Charles Schwab or Fidelity that's supposed to physically hold investor assets separate from the fund manager. Legitimate funds have a custodian precisely so the manager can't just take the money and disappear. I didn't ask who Meridian's custodian was. I didn't even know that question existed. David also did something specific and deliberate. He showed me, briefly, on his phone, never sent as a file I could keep, a statement showing my cousin and her husband's own money in the fund. "We've got about $180,000 in it ourselves," he said. "I wouldn't put family in something I wasn't in myself." That's the oldest move in the affinity fraud playbook, and it has a name investigators use: social proof through simulated co-investment. He wasn't risking $1 of his own money, but by claiming to have skin in the game, he neutralized my last real objection. In September, I wired $50,000 from my savings account to an account David identified as Meridian Growth Partners LLC at a regional bank, not a brokerage, a regular business checking account. I didn't think twice about that at the time. I do now. Legitimate investment funds don't accept your capital into a plain LLC checking account with no subscription agreement, no wire instructions on fund letterhead, and no confirmation from a custodian. I got a text 20 minutes after the wire cleared. "Got it. Welcome to the fund." That emoji haunted me for months. A man had just taken $50,000 of my money, and the confirmation was a party emoji. For the first 6 weeks, everything seemed normal. I got a statement, a screenshot, always a screenshot, never an actual downloadable PDF from a real platform, showing my $50,000 growing to $51,900, then $53,400. I remember doing the math in my head and thinking, at this rate, I'd make back a year of grad school tuition by spring. I told my sister. I told a coworker. I was, in hindsight, doing free marketing for a fraud. Then, in late November, the statements stopped coming on schedule, and that small, easily dismissed delay was the first thread that 4 months later I would pull until the entire thing unraveled. The statements went from arriving on the 1st of every month, like clockwork, to arriving on the 8th, then the 15th. David blamed a system migration at the fund's back office. I believed him because why wouldn't I? Family doesn't lie about system migrations. Then, in December, I texted asking a simple question. Could I pull out $5,000 for a car repair? Nothing dramatic, a routine withdrawal request, the kind any real investor makes constantly. David didn't respond for 4 days. When he finally did, the message was long and full of very specific-sounding language like, "There's a 90-day lockup window tied to the current fund cycle. It's in the subscription docs. I should have flagged it more clearly. Sorry. Should clear by early March." I want to point out something important here. This was the first moment David used jargon as a weapon. lockup window, redemption cycle, real terms used by real funds. Hedge funds and private equity vehicles genuinely do sometimes restrict withdrawals for a set period. That's exactly why it worked. He wasn't inventing a language, he was borrowing one, wearing it like a costume to make a stall tactic sound like standard industry practice. I asked to see the subscription docs he mentioned. He said he'd dig them up. He never did. By January, I'd asked 4 separate times for either a withdrawal or the actual fund documentation, each time a new excuse, a compliance review, a banking partner switch. Once, unbelievably, my laptop with the fund files got stolen out of my car. That's when I did something I should have done 5 months earlier. I opened a browser and typed Meridian Growth Partners SEC into the search bar. Nothing. No registration, no Form ADV, no record in the SEC's Investment Advisor Public Disclosure Database, no record with FINRA's BrokerCheck, nothing on the Ohio Division of Securities Registry either. A real investment advisor managing outside money at this scale is legally required to register with the SEC or the state. There is no legitimate version of Meridian Growth Partners that simply doesn't exist in any regulatory database. My stomach dropped in a very specific physical way that I think anyone who's been scammed will recognize. It's not panic yet. It's the 10 seconds before panic, where your brain is still trying to find an innocent explanation and failing. I called David directly, instead of texting. I wanted to hear his voice, because I've always been better at reading people live than in writing. I asked him point blank, "Is Meridian registered anywhere? I can't find it." His answer is one I've replayed more times than I can count. "A lot of private funds operate under exemptions, Sarah. You're overthinking this." That sentence is technically true in the broadest sense. Some private funds do rely on exemptions from full registration, typically under Regulation D of the Securities Act, if they only take money from accredited investors and file a Form D with the SEC. So I checked that too. I searched the SEC's Edgar database for any Form D filing under Meridian in Ohio. Nothing. Over the following 2 weeks, I did what I now recognize as the beginning of my own investigation, though at the time it just felt like desperate, sleepless fact-checking at 2 a.m. I pulled every text message David had ever sent me about the fund. I screenshotted every statement image, even though I now understood they were probably fabricated in an image editor, or more likely an Excel sheet formatted to look like a brokerage export. I made a folder. I dated everything. The financial damage was $50,000 principal, plus what I now understood were entirely fictional gains that existed nowhere except in a screenshot, meaning my real total loss was the full $50,000, not the $53,400 plus I'd been mentally counting. The emotional damage was worse. This wasn't a stranger. This was someone who sat across from me at Thanksgiving. My cousin, his wife, had no idea any of this was happening, which meant I now faced an impossible choice: stay silent and lose the money, or say something and detonate my own family. The relational damage came fast once I chose the second option. When I told my cousin what had happened, she didn't believe me at first, not because she doubted my honesty, but because, and I understand this now, admitting your spouse is a fraud requires dismantling your entire picture of your own life in real time. That's not something anyone does in one conversation. And that's when I found the smoking gun. While going through old texts, I found something I'd forgotten about entirely, a screenshot David had sent me back in October of his own account showing his $180,000 stake in Meridian. I zoomed in on it for the first time in months, really looking, and noticed the account holder name field was cut off at the edge of the screenshot in a way that looked deliberately cropped, and the statement used a font and layout nearly identical to a template I recognized because I'd seen the exact same table styling on a free online invoice generator, the kind small businesses use to make quick PDFs, not a brokerage statement, a homemade one. That was the moment the last of my doubt died. This wasn't a fund that had underperformed. This wasn't a legal gray area. This was, as far as I could tell, a man who had built an entire fictional financial institution out of screenshots, jargon, and family trust, and who had already spent, moved, or hidden $50,000 of my money. I closed my laptop that night and made a decision that changed everything about how this story ends. I stopped being a victim asking for my money back, and I started being an investigator building a file. I want to walk you through this section carefully, because if you're watching this because something similar is happening to you right now, this is the part that actually matters. Step 1, the paper trail. The first thing I did was request my own wire transfer confirmation from my bank, not the screenshot David had sent me, but the actual originating bank's record of where the $50,000 had gone. That document gave me something David's screenshots never could: the exact receiving bank name, the account number, and a timestamp. I learned something during this process that I now tell everyone. Your bank keeps a far more detailed record of an outgoing wire than you'd think, and you have a legal right to request it. I called my bank's fraud department, explained the situation, and they walked me through pulling the full wire trace, which even showed the receiving bank's routing information. Step 2, building the timeline. I built what investigators later told me was essentially a professional-grade timeline. I didn't know that's what I was doing, I just wanted to keep myself sane. Every text, every statement screenshot, every excuse, every date, laid out in a single spreadsheet with columns for date, claim made, and whether it was verifiable. Looking at it laid out like that, the pattern became undeniable in a way it never was living through it day by day. The excuses always escalated exactly when I asked for money back. The gains only ever appeared in unverifiable images. There was never, not once in 6 months, a document that came from an actual third-party institution. Step 3. Finding other victims. This was the part that broke the case wide open. I reached out, carefully, to a mutual friend who I vaguely remembered David mentioning as another fund investor at a barbecue the year before. I didn't accuse anyone of anything, I just asked, gently, how their investment with David was going. The silence on the other end of that phone call told me everything before she said a word. It turned out there were at least 2 other people, a coworker of David's and a member of his church, who had put in $22,000 and $31,000 respectively, both experiencing the identical pattern: consistent early returns, then stalling excuses the moment they asked to withdraw. That detail, multiple victims, same pattern, same fabricated fund, was the single most important piece of evidence I had, because it's the difference between a private dispute over an investment that underperformed and a textbook Ponzi-style securities fraud. Step 4. Going to the professionals. With my timeline, my wire records, and now 3 victims' worth of corroborating detail, I did 3 things within the same week. First, I filed a complaint with the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, known as IC3, which is the federal government's central intake point for reporting fraud. Wire fraud and investment fraud both qualify. Second, I filed a complaint with the Ohio Division of Securities, since Meridian was never registered to sell securities in the state, and unregistered security sales are a violation regulators actively pursue. Third, and this is the step I'd tell anyone in my position to take immediately, I consulted a securities fraud attorney for an initial consultation. She explained something I hadn't fully understood. This wasn't just a criminal matter for prosecutors to decide whether to pursue. I also had a civil path, meaning I could sue David directly for the return of my funds plus damages, regardless of whether or when any criminal charges came.
The near miss. Here's where the story almost went a different way entirely. About 5 weeks into the investigation, my attorney helped me send David a formal demand letter, a document laying out the debt and requesting repayment before litigation. David's response wasn't a confession. It was a lawyer of his own and an offer. $15,000 now, the rest over time if I agreed to sign an NDA and drop everything. I won't pretend it wasn't tempting. $15,000 immediately felt like solid ground after months of nothing. My attorney told me something I think about constantly. An NDA doesn't just protect you from talking, it protects him from consequences. If there are other victims and you sign this, you become part of the machinery that lets him do it again. I said no. 2 weeks later, through a subpoena my attorney issued as part of the civil case, we got access to David's actual bank records for the Meridian LLC account. And that's where the entire fiction fell apart in a way no screenshot ever could. What the records showed. The $50,000 I'd wired in September had been moved through the Meridian account within 11 days, split into transfers to 2 personal accounts, a payment to a boat dealership, and a cash withdrawal. There had never been any pre-IPO investments. There had never been structured notes. There had never, at any point, been actual investment activity of any kind. It was, in the words of the forensic accountant my attorney brought in, a pass-through account functioning purely to receive and redistribute victim deposits, the textbook definition of a Ponzi scheme, where new contributions and personal spending replace any actual investment returns. I sat in my car in a parking lot after that meeting and cried for the first time since November, not from sadness, from the specific, overwhelming relief of finally, after 5 months, having proof instead of just a feeling. The forensic accounting became the backbone of both cases moving forward, criminal and civil, running on parallel tracks. On the civil side, my attorney filed suit against David for breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, and conversion, which is just the legal term for wrongfully taking someone else's property. Because we had bank records, the fabricated statements, corroborating testimony from 2 other victims, and the demand letter showing his own attempted settlement, the case was, in her words, about as clean as civil fraud cases get. Rather than go to trial, David's attorney negotiated a consent judgment. This meant David formally agreed, on the record in front of a judge, that he owed me the full amount without contesting any of the facts. The final civil judgment came out to $50,000 in principal, $6,850 in pre-judgment interest, and $9,200 in attorney's fees and court costs that David was ordered to cover, bringing the total recovery to $66,050. On the criminal side, the county prosecutor's office, working alongside a securities fraud unit that had also picked up the case after the state regulatory complaint, charged David with securities fraud and theft by deception. Because the total amount taken across all 3 known victims exceeded $100,000, the theft charge was elevated to a felony under Ohio law. David pled guilty rather than face trial. His plea agreement included 5 years of probation, mandatory restitution to all 3 victims, and a permanent bar from working in any financial services or investment advisory capacity in the state of Ohio. I was in the courtroom the day he entered that plea. I watched a man who had once helped me carry boxes up 3 flights of stairs stand in a gray suit and admit, out loud, in front of a judge, that he had built an entire fictional investment fund just to steal from his own family and community. I won't pretend it felt like triumph in the movie sense. It felt quiet. It felt like something finally closing. Because Ohio court records are public, and because the case included multiple victims, a local business journalist picked up the story shortly after the plea. The article didn't use my name. I asked that it wouldn't, but it named David, named Meridian Growth Partners as a fabricated entity, and laid out the mechanics of the fraud in detail. Within a week, 2 more people reached out to the prosecutor's office, having recognized the exact same pattern from their own dealings with David, going back even further than my case. That detail matters more to me than almost anything else in this story. Going through the investigation properly, instead of quietly accepting a partial settlement and an NDA, meant other people got their money back too. Here's the part that still catches people off guard when I tell this story. People assume a scammer like this must have been funding some lavish, visible lifestyle, the boat, the watches, the vacations you'd expect from a movie villain. But the forensic accounting told a completely different story. About 60% of the money across all 3 victims had gone toward paying off David's own pre-existing debt, specifically a second mortgage he'd taken out that had ballooned, and credit card debt from a failed side business 2 years earlier that neither his wife, my cousin, nor anyone in the family had known about. The boat purchase I mentioned earlier was actually a repossession payoff, not a new purchase. He was paying off boat debt he already owed, not buying anything new. There's no version of that detail that makes what he did forgivable, but it reframed something for me. This wasn't a criminal mastermind running a sophisticated operation from some position of power. It was a man who had made one bad financial decision years earlier, hidden it out of shame, and then built an escalating fraud to keep hiding it, using the trust of the people closest to him as the raw material. The full $66,050 was paid out over 14 months, structured through the restitution order and monitored by his probation officer. This meant if David missed a single payment, he faced violating his probation and potential jail time, which was a far stronger enforcement mechanism than a private settlement ever would have given me. I put the recovered money back into a high-yield savings account first, not because I don't believe in investing, but because I needed, psychologically, to rebuild trust in my own financial decision-making before I put money anywhere that required trusting someone else's judgment again. 6 months later, I opened a brokerage account with a well-known SEC-registered institution and started investing in low-cost index funds, the boring, verifiable, heavily regulated way. I check FINRA BrokerCheck and the SEC's database now before I so much as discuss finances with anyone claiming financial expertise, family or not. I ask immediately whether an investment is registered, who the custodian is, and whether I can see an actual audited statement rather than a screenshot. It sounds paranoid. It isn't. It's the bare minimum due diligence I wish I'd known to do the first time. If you take away just one thing from this story, I want it to be this. The warning signs were there almost the entire time. I just didn't know to look for them. So here's what I watch for now every single time. First, unregistered funds. Any real investment advisor managing outside money is required to register with the SEC or their state securities regulator. This takes 30 seconds to check on the SEC's website or FINRA's BrokerCheck. No registration is not a technicality. It is an absolute deal breaker. Second, screenshots instead of statements. A legitimate custodian, like Schwab or Fidelity, sends you access directly. If the only proof you ever see is a picture someone else texted or emailed you, that's not a statement. That's just a claim.
Third, reluctance and scarcity as a sales tactic. Phrases like, "I probably shouldn't even be telling you this," is not modesty. It's a script. Fourth, withdrawal delays dressed up in real jargon. Lockup period, redemption cycle, or compliance review are real terms, borrowed to make a stall tactic sound legitimate. Ask for the actual document that describes that policy. If it doesn't exist, neither does the policy. And finally, affinity fraud. The closer someone is to you, family, church, your local community, the less scrutiny we naturally apply, and the more damage a fraud can do before anyone speaks up. Trust the relationship, but verify the investment anyway. If something like this has happened to you, please know it is never too late to start building a file. Save every message. Request your actual bank records, not the ones anyone else sends you. File a report with the FBI's IC3. Contact your state securities regulator and consult an attorney. Many offer free initial consultations for fraud cases. You are not overreacting, and you are not alone. I'd genuinely like to know, has something like this happened to you, or almost happened to you? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and honestly, some of the best warning signs I now share with this audience came directly from viewers who lived through their own version of this story. If this video helped you, hit subscribe for next week's story, and I'll see you then.